Hello, and thank you for joining us today for this third edition of our GWO Expert Series webinars on digitalisation and training. I'm Ralph Savage, Head of Communication at GWO. Alongside me is our CEO, Jakob Host. In this series, we'll be bringing you together with our membership for a look at what the future could hold as digital solutions become a more common part of the GWO training mix. Up on screen, we have our first audience panel question. We want you to be a part of the panel debate as well, so please take a moment to log on to menti.com and type in the code you see on screen. Your contribution will appear live and it gives us plenty of food for thought. While the results begin to form, we've got a few responses in there. Jakob, what do you think about what we're seeing so far?
Thank you for the responses from those of you who've managed to log in already and give them. I think there's a broad agreement that digitalization will have an effect. And I think it groups into two, as is evident, two types of answers. Either the customer will decide, but also it will encourage the adoption of GWO around the world. And I think there's no one answer. See a couple of more taking in on some resistance to traditional, in favor of traditional methods. Perhaps what I think we learned from the webinar we had with the training providers earlier, the first one is that it will encourage the adoption and it will be used and it will be a customer application or a customer requirement. So I think that's in line with this. Thanks.
So thanks again to everyone for playing your part. We'll have more opportunities like this throughout the webinar, but for now I'd like to introduce our topic and our panel for today. In the first two webinars, we focused on quality of learning and certification. This week we move on to the final part of the three to debate how digitalisation could influence the growth and adoption of GWO standards around the world. Our first guest is Jill Leese. Jill is Vice Chair of the GWO Executive Committee. She's over 30 years of energy sector experience, leading transformational engineering projects globally. Chemistry graduate, she also has a PhD in material science and believes passionately in encouraging women to progress in engineering and technology. From Vestas, I'm hoping we have John Barry on the line. John has worked in senior training roles within the renewable energy and industrial sectors for several years. At GWO, he helps coordinate the development of new standards alongside the Secretariat as chair of the GWO Training Committee. John's had a few technical issues logging in, so we hope to have him online, at least just his voice, so we can hear what he has to say. Today's debate is very much a global story, and representing GWO's Chinese membership of manufacturers and developers is Mr. Yu Hui. Hui has worked closely with the GWO Secretariat for almost 3 years, helping to establish the China Committee, alongside our China Chair, Mr. Qin Haiyan. Hui has overseen the recent accession of new GWO members like CGN Wind Power, for example. And finally, from Siemens Gamesa, we have Philip Rasmussen, who is Global Head of QM and HSE at the Manufacturer's Service Business. Philip's worked in wind since 2007, holding various positions within the supply chain, project execution and service areas. Before this, he spent 16 years in the military, including part-time teaching roles and working on rehabilitation for people suffering from sporting and work injuries. So welcome to all of you, our guests today. So today's agenda begins with a reminder from Jakob of the year so far and a briefing on the GWO strategy, Safety Without Borders. After this, we'll review the lessons learned from the first two webinars in this series on digitalisation. This should bring us to about the 15-minute mark when we'll begin the panel discussion and hear from our guests. There'll be more opportunities to ask us questions directly, so please don't hesitate to write down anything you'd like and put to today's panel. So Jakob, let's turn to you and find out what's been happening in 2020.
Okay, thanks, Ralph. So even before COVID-19 hit us all, our 2022 strategy, called Safety Without Borders, contained an ambition to facilitate greater use of digital tools in training and auditing. And we released the strategy, Safety Without Borders, on March 11 in the morning. A central target for this strategy was to double the trained workforce by end of 2022. But then in the afternoon, a global pandemic was declared by the World Health Organization, and the world went into lockdown. And in the following several weeks, more than 1,000 technicians left their refresher training every week. And it's safe to say that the need for digital solution was seriously fast-tracked by COVID-19. So on the screen, on the screen we have now here, we have the 4 things that the team of GWO Secretariat brought to the market in April, along with working groups of the training committee and the audit compliance committee. And we did this several months and even years in advance of our schedule. We've begun evaluating this work, and what we learned today with you in this webinar series will feed back into our strategy session on 29th of September. So first of all, we fast-tracked our work on the requirements for training providers and the requirements for certification bodies to describe what we at GWO see as relevant use of digital tools. For training providers, this now allows them to be certified to deliver blended solutions for all training standards. And that is a tangible result. Before April, we had 1 training provider delivering a blended learning package. And now here in early September, or actually in mid-September, we are less than 5 months later. We have now 36 training providers, or roughly 10% of the community worldwide, that are certified to deliver one or several GWO standards using digital tools and blended learning solutions. So the community has responded rapidly to this crisis, and I thank you for that. How rapidly can be seen from this graph. So the orange line, and this graph you also need explaining. So the orange line shows how training was impacted by COVID globally. Going to April, a huge dip, measured as number of uploaded records of training. So while we're still behind our annual target in absolute numbers for 2020, monthly training volumes now have exceeds even those scenarios we laid out prior to COVID. The scenario is the red line up top. That is somehow surprising and very satisfying that we have bounced back so fast and that the uptake is so great. It means that our training community has a lot of volume that they can deliver. Part of the recovery can be attributed to digital blending learning solutions, or the BSTR partial from the 36 training providers. Another part of it has been facilitated by remote auditing for annual surveillance and for recertification, which we talked about in the second of these webinar series.
Thanks, Jakob. So briefly before we bring our panel into the day's proceedings, we want to remind you about what we've learned so far in the last couple of weeks. In episode 1, we brought together a group of experts on training delivery from the GWO membership and also gauged what you thought could be some of the benefits of digitalisation. We had over 60 GWO training providers online in the first episode, and a quick poll during the webinar. Around 3/4 told us that they'll be actively looking to develop some form of digital delivery in the next 12 months. Looking at the potential benefits, our panel said that digitalisation could support greater personalisation of the learning experience while enabling a more flexible programme, particularly for their employees who have operational commitments to fulfil. Another interesting point was raised about inclusivity with the example provided by MHI Vestas and their Safety of Mind mobile app. We discovered that digital solutions like this can help training providers assess the differing skill levels of participants at the beginning of the course, helping to guide their learning and not putting everybody in the same box. In episode 2, we focused largely on remote audits, how certification bodies are adapting to the practice so that they can observe learning as it happens and certify a training provider while not being physically in the classroom or the training centre. Our panel had plenty to say on the ways this challenge could be overcome, but we were very grateful also for some suggestions which came alongside. As we all know, digital delivery means different things to different people, and our panel suggested that GWO should focus its efforts on further simplifying our standards so everyone can understand the content and implement them correctly. The message was clear. The business environment is transforming, and if training providers want to introduce digital elements, GWO's requirements should guide auditors and ensure that the learning objective is achieved without compromising the quality of training. So with that in mind, we want to ask you our second question of the day. So please take a moment again to visit menti.com and type in the code 2993056. Essentially, we want to know, do GWO's standards and requirements need simplifying? Please please tell us. And while those results start coming in, I'd like to bring some of our panelists online. I'm going to ask John if we can hear you, John, if you're online. If not, then I'll put this question to...
Yeah,
great, hi John.
Can you hear me okay? Good, we're working.
Yeah, so we can't see you, John, but I'd like to bring you into the discussion on this, seeing as you lead the training committee. The panel last week was essentially saying that with more guidance and clarity in the standards, we could help everyone make a big step towards digital delivery. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a prerequisite to do this in the right way. I mean, we've talked a lot within the training committee about the role of GWO versus the role of training providers in the market, and you know, we're clear that training providers, I think, will be the force that will really drive innovation here in digitalisation, and that's not something that we should try to do for them. However, what we do need to do is we do need to set some really clear guidelines and some really clear standards, and that would include right down to, you know, the learning objective level, and defining what do we believe can or can't be done by a digital solution. So, and to sort of draw some red lines, and that's been based both on the kind of member discussion, but also on some discussions with training providers where, you know, there is potential concerns here on quality and how do we manage that. So yeah, I think it'll be a kind of partnership where we set standards and then we allow sufficient room for training providers to innovate and really lead the way in terms of which digital solutions can be used.
So can I ask you, John, so you say we draw a red line, what can and what cannot be used or what cannot be delivered by digital solutions? What if someone comes up with something new that's pretty smart?
Yeah, and this is it. So one of the things that probably you'll have noticed is that we haven't tried to specify exactly which digital solutions can or should be used, and that's because we know this is a rapidly changing environment. So I would see it very much as an iterative process, that we take a starting point about what we believe can be done digitally, and then if someone can challenge that and prove differently through open dialogue, then that red line moves. I mean, that to me is how it should work. So we start with a baseline, but then we're open to changing it when someone shows you know, the power of what can be done through a digital technology that we perhaps haven't considered or haven't seen or hasn't been demonstrated before.
All right.
So it's looking like a fairly strong lean towards a need for simplification in relation to making the switch to digital delivery. We've got, I would call that about 80 or 90% of participants have leaned in that direction.
Yeah.
So now it's time to hear more from our panel today on this issue about whether digitalisation could help us reach our goal of 200,000 GWO trained workers around the world by the end of 2022. So the first question poses exactly that point, and our panel has, as I said, a really global perspective. So I'll be asking you all with a particular focus on certain parts of the world, if that's okay. Jill Leese first. RWE has big operations in North America. Right now there are 17 GWO sites training around 3,000 workers a year there. So we're still far from the levels seen in Europe. Could digitalisation be the key to unlocking GWO in that part of the world? What do you think?
Hi, thanks for that. Yeah, I mean, from our perspective, RWE, we have around a third of our wind turbine technician workforce actually in North America. So it's a pretty large market. The remainder are probably in Europe, in various countries. So I mean, on that basis, we've seen a rapid development in the number of centres, and we've also found that, you know, our technicians, you know, are based across the US, and therefore for us the ability to be able to do a large proportion of the training from a digital point of view. So currently, you know, with the new digital standards, we're able to do 75% of the refresher can be delivered via digital means. That's a real benefit because it means the guys can do the refresher in their own time. It also means they can utilize their own equipment rather than, you know, when they go to the training center. So I can see huge benefits. And also, you know, as we go into other regions in North America where or other states where perhaps there aren't more local GWO training providers, it means again they can still access that digital means. So there's a real cost benefit, if only for the the disruption of the travel. The US, we think of every time I go to Texas, I'm amazed by it can take me a day to get from one of our East Coast to our more westerly sites. So if people have to spend a day traveling to a training center, doing the training the following day, then a day traveling back, being able to deliver a proportion of that digitally, with the need for removing 2 days of travel, is a huge benefit from an operational perspective. So bottom line, yes, I think it can absolutely help the growth and adoption of the standards.
Okay, thanks, Jill. I'll turn to you, Philip Rasmussen from Siemens Gamesa. The same question, but let's pick another region. I drew out of the hat India. It has huge potentials, comfortably in second place behind China in Asia's Wind League table. I know Siemens Gamesa has some big operations there. Do you, the same kind of idea, could digital offer a solution and get more people trained where it's most needed?
I'm 100% confident that this will definitely be a good segue to include more people in the GWO trainings into this. I see a lot of benefits in the digitalization, also on what Jill is saying, building on that as well. Especially the refresher part into this will be a lot of benefits going into this. And when we look at India, right, Jill just mentioned Texas as an area, right? India is also a very large country, where we also are moving people from north to south, and we have a limited number of training centers in these areas as well. So if we can move into a digitalization of some of the trainings, this will clearly be a big benefit. One of the benefits also for India is basically also, if you look at the language part, right? Because for all of our people in India, English is also a preferred language, right? So even there, we also have a big opportunity that we don't have to switch into many different types of languages. So it can be a good benefit also to transfer these into India as well. I definitely see that that will be a good market on this. And also, if we look at the environmental impact as well, if we also take that part in, right, we are traveling by trains, we're traveling by car, we're traveling by planes and all of that. So it will also have a big impact on our environmental footprint, as long as we can also start digitalizing some of this. So I'm very confident that this will be a huge opportunity for us to go in this direction.
Thanks, Philip. Yu Hui, representing our Chinese membership. Hello again to you, sir. Obviously, the workforce training need in your country is huge, and many large GWO facilities have opened in recent years. What's your thoughts with regards to digital as a way to help us reach those targets that Jakob had talked about before? I mean, double the number of trained GWO trained workers than any other region in the world.
Yeah, thank you, Ralph. Yes, I think Jill and Philip's ideas are agreed. Digitalization is definitely one of the potentials that could help the growth or the adoption of GWO standards in the Chinese market. And I can see so many advantages of this way, like flexibility, like lower cost, not only in time, but also in the language that Philip just mentioned, people can choose. And I'm very aware of that fact that GWO is setting up the goals for 2020 and also trying to find solutions to achieve that goal. And I'm also very confident that digitalization is one of the solutions we can have. However, I personally do have some concerns. We need to bear in mind that we shouldn't go faster than we are able to go. So new measures definitely bring challenges. And like I said before a few times, like there are some obstacles that we have to consider when we move forwards, like how would it be designed to guarantee the quality of the training? How would the auditing be done in the future when digitalization implemented? How would the CVs carry out the auditing? Those kind of questions. If these questions are answered, I think it will be a very good way. So for me, we should be optimistic, but also be cautious.
Thank you, Hui. And finally, before we move on to the next topic, John Barry, Vestas has a presence everywhere, of course, but in Latin America particularly. What sort of difference could digital delivery do in countries like Brazil or Argentina?
Yeah, I mean, I think the guys have touched on a lot of the themes already, but you're right. I mean, Latin America is right now, the level of penetration of the wind industry is still relatively low, but it's one of the fastest growing markets in the world. And, you know, in a number of years, it'll be an equivalent of Europe, I'm sure, at least. And the challenges are of geography. I mean, Brazil is the size of Europe in itself. And if I talk to our own experience there, we have a training facility. It's moved 3 times in 5 years because the market changes. So the ability to respond quickly and flexibly as a training provider and giving training solutions is really challenging. And I think digitalisation will go a long way to solving some of that, if not all of it. And then perhaps the only other thing which the other guys didn't reference is that, you know, in areas like Latin America and many other emerging markets around the world, we have a very young population. And even in cases where we see a lower educational level or lack of technical skills, there's a real familiarity with digital media. So it's an open door in terms of this as a methodology to really engage with that, you know, with that demographic.
Great. Any further thoughts from you on that?
No, I'm taking some notes here, and I think this is all of this is in line with what we learned in the first webinar series, where, you know, lower cost and some flexibility is something that can drive and will drive the adoption. But I think it's from the webinar we had, the first webinar, the options to personalize the training and to meet the course participants where they are, and actually deliver much better training and much better learning for the individual, was something that was highlighted by the training providers. And the option to deliver more customizable training is something that I think will be a driver as well. So it's not just about cost and efficiency, but it's also about delivering a better quality and a better learning experience.
Okay, next question. Does digitalization raise or lower barriers to entry for training providers? Obviously, we know there are lots of companies that are already established, but in order to grow the market, new ones will need to enter the market themselves, perhaps from scratch. Philip, I'll turn to you on this one first. What are your thoughts?
Thank you for this, Ralph. I definitely think that we will see maybe in the future a different set of training providers also going into the market. Because some of the original training providers will also have to team up with somebody who is expert within digitalization as well. So I really also hope that we will see new connections into this. Whether it will be more difficult or easier for new ones to come in is, of course, a very, very difficult question to answer. I see that we need both. Because we will still need some of the local training providers, because a lot of the trainings which we can say is first-time trainings, we would still like to have people face-to-face. But then when we do move into the refresh area, then I'm also certain that we will see new training providers also popping up, which we have not seen in the past.
Great. John, any thoughts on this? You know, both you and your company and Siemens Gamesa operate training businesses of their own. What about the independent market? Do you think digitalization raises or lowers barriers for entry?
I mean, to some extent, it does both. So it raises the barriers in the sense that I think long term, if as a provider you're not open to some form of digital solution or blended solution, then probably you won't be in business in a number of years to come, and that does require some different competencies, as Philip says. You know, so whether or not that's having your own development function, that's one route, but if not, the ability to partner with other kinds of suppliers who offer digital solutions and integrating that into the curriculum will be key. I mean, the reason I say both is because on the other hand, we could argue that this could lower the barriers in sense of physical facilities and equipment are really expensive. We all know that managing demand with peaks and troughs is difficult in terms of number of trainers, and digital solutions, offer actually a lower cost solution and the ability to deliver a consistent product all year round, irrespective of the level of demand. So I think to the key word really, it'll be about the right partnerships to be successful.
Okay. I'm going to move quickly to the next question, which follows a similar line. Indeed, it's a valid concern for many training providers. I'll turn to you, Hui. Can you tell us if this might be a question being asked by training providers in China?
So the third question, right? It's
yes.
showing the third question on my screen. Yes. Yeah. For this question, I think we have to discuss about it from different dimensions. I think it's like, first, would it be accepted by the industry? It showed in the previous slides. Would it be accepted by the customer? I think that would be the first question we have to answer. From the position where I'm at in China, there are some other training measures prior to GWO. Actually, they are kind of still going on. It's all about like books on the tables in the classroom, like a teacher that mumble everything into your ear, if not all the way to your mind. Those kind of learning are not accepted, but there were nothing else to choose. That's why GWO got picked up in China, because they like what you're doing, and it worked. There are like more than 10, not a lot, but there are more than 10 training providers that's running day and night. I have to say that lots of training providers are full of delegates. So this is a very good way we are going through. But then digitalization. So how much we're going to change? We don't want to go back. It's just like face-to-face by apps, by computers. It's again by reading something from the book. So where is the exercise? Where is the interaction with the instructors? So we don't want to go back, and that will lose the momentum we've already gained in the Chinese market. So that's like my biggest concern about this. And then about the tools, like what I said just now, like computers, apps on mobile phone, and then maybe VR and AR, those kind of stuff. Then we have questions about availability, quality, reliability, those kind of stuff. But maybe we can learn from other industries that have already adapted such kind of tools. So they have experience already, then we learn from their mistakes, maybe their achievements. So definitely challenging, but I think we will always find a way to deal with it. So last one is that I remember that we had this a global alignment project, but the differences between the GWO standards and local standards, regulation, laws. So digitalization, would there be the same problem? So maybe I propose we start from the beginning with more international voice involved. So we don't have to start another global alignment project afterwards.
Definitely.
So those are the things that I have in my mind. Yeah.
I'm getting some nods from Philip and Jill. I'll ask the same question to you first, Jill. Any sort of thoughts about how we can overcome, if indeed we need to, any challenges of resistance towards the adoption of digitalisation?
Well, I think for me, John already touched on it in terms of the demographics. The demographics of the existing, but more importantly, the demographics of the future wind turbine technicians. Their expectations in terms of they're the expectations as trainees, their learning expectations, how they actually are currently, as they are progressing through their educational and then entering into the sector, how they currently consume and get the learning. They're used to receiving far more in a digital environment, and I have to reflect on myself and say, I am not typical of the demographics coming through, and we need to reflect on that. I think it's really important so that we continue to make sure that we maintain the standards, however we do that, because fundamentally we're about raising the standards and also maintaining that that level of safety and aiming for that sort of like injury-free workplace. But I think we need to focus on how can we deploy the digital technologies appropriately, how do we get the balance between having standardization of the learning and the learning objectives, and at the same time having the flexibility of the trainee to be able to deep dive into the areas that they want to deep dive into, and refresh in different areas. So I think we need to balance that standardization versus flexibility, and recognizing, that fundamentally we need to ensure that the quality that GWO stands for is maintained. So I don't think there's a resistance, but I think we need to just to ensure that we keep those things in mind as we further deploy digital solutions.
Thank you, Jill.
Yeah, perhaps just to reiterate a little bit, I think I'm very mindful that if we continue, or if we put too much emphasis on the lowering costs, that will come with a perception that we're also lowering quality, and that is something that we have to be very mindful, because that is not that should not be the case. I mean, this the move towards digitalization has a promise of actually giving us much better quality, much higher quality in terms of learning, customization, personalization, the ability to go back and refresh, and actually maybe to do refreshers throughout a 2-year cycle instead of every 2 years. You can do it on your own while you are at the job.
You're preempting our next question.
So there are so many qualities that we can try to achieve in digitalization, and we should be focusing on this. And of course, lowering costs has always, and it will always be one of the drivers of standardization. That's how it is. But it's the other thing we should be chasing to maintain the credibility.
All right. Well, since you brought it up, let's go on to the next question. We are always happy to hold a mirror up to GWO at these webinars, and this question is one of those. It's not always a popular thing to have an arbitrary rule that locks everybody in, but there are very good reasons. There's a 2-year refresher cycle in existence for most of the safety training standards that we operate. Philip, let's move to you first. What do you think digitalization could mean for the future of the refresher cycle in its current form?
Definitely, it will make it more flexible, right? First of all, to do this, what we see today is that when we send people for refresher training, then we are very happy to bundle the training, meaning that we take out a service technician or a maintenance technicians for a week, as an example, to go into all the refresher trainings. When we go into a digitalization, this will definitely be more flexible for the workforce and will also give us a lot of opportunities into the planning part. So I see this as one of the significant also advantages going for the refresher training, and the digitization into this, is that the market will be much more flexible when we do the planning into this. So that is for sure one of the great benefits into this.
Thanks, Philip. Same again to John. Will the refresher cycle be with us forever, or will it be adapted to accommodate new ways of delivering learning?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have a crystal ball, but I mean, I believe that the need to formally refresh training will continue. I don't see that going away. I think that's important to demonstrate compliance and duty of care. I think as Philip was saying, the debate here is, well, how could that be done better? And the kind of challenge that I would always give to my team is, well, why do we wait 2 years to refresh training? What about the opportunities here in terms of reminders, tests, sharing best practice? All of these things that, if we're honest, the main reason we don't do them is because it costs a lot of money to bring people together physically to run activities and do that kind of activity. So digitalization opens the door for doing this at more on an ongoing basis, and then maybe the nature of the formal refresher changes. Maybe it's shorter, maybe the interval between refreshers is bigger, I don't know, but we'll just think of it differently, and I actually think we'll think of it in a higher quality way if we really implement that in the right way.
Yeah. I'd like to turn to you, Hui, in China. Do you imagine that the customer demand potentially, with the number of very, very large developers that are beginning to use and enforce GWO as a standard for their workforce? Would they appreciate more flexibility in the way their workforce is able to train, and perhaps having the 2-year refresher cycle in a more flexible approach? Would that be something that might be appreciated?
Yes, definitely. But I have to say that we responded a little bit slower than the 36 training providers. I didn't see one from China that took this SDR partial. But I do believe that the SDR partial is a very good try, and I have to say well done. But I don't really see the value from this SDRP. I do see that it's a very good exploration and it's kind of experience for digitalization in a whole. So yeah, I'm very confident that digitalization will help the Chinese market because of the advantage we have mentioned before. And in the first webinar, I think in 3rd of September, a case scenario was shared, and that makes me believe that digitalization is the future. And so I'm very confident with the development and final implementation. Yeah.
Thank you, Gui. So we're just a little bit past halfway through, and we're going to come to our last panel debate question. I also want to encourage, if you're listening in, that you have an opportunity to just type in a question for the panel. Otherwise, we'll leave it to ourselves to continue the conversation. So the final question that we've agreed amongst ourselves is in relation to quality moving forwards. We've touched upon this already quite a few times, but John, you've confirmed, like the others, how digital is kind of inevitable, but you want learning to remain the focus, right?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. So I always think that, in regards to the other questions, well, about barriers and some of the skepticism or cynicism about digital solutions, I just think we need to have a really sort of fact-based approach to this. And if we know we can deliver the learning objective successfully using a digital technology, then that's what we should do. So that to me is key. And GWO's role here is about helping to set those standards in a dialogue with training providers about what can and can't be done digitally and what does that look like.
Again, same topic this time to you, Jill. How, given the likelihood that digital is going to be implemented in more and more circumstances, will you be trying to convey the fact that those training providers who come to you with an offering in this regard, you'll be asking them to prove to you ultimately that they can achieve those learning objectives, right?
Yes, of course. I mean, the reason why we use GWO across our business, and it's our minimum requirement for our technicians, is because it does give you that quality mark. So we know that if our technicians have got the BST, we know what standard of training as a baseline they've got. So that for us is very important, particularly as we go into new markets and emerging markets for wind turbines. We need to ensure that the people we employ there, whether it's the contractors we use in supporting the delivery of our projects, or once we get the projects into operation, that the standard of the training and the standard of the knowledge is appropriate, and using a GWO standards allows us to do that. So we'll be very open to, can we use, have they got a digital version? But for us, what will be important is that the quality is maintained, and that's partly assured by the audit of the training providers. So the witnessing and the audit of the delivery of the training, whether that's in a digital medium or whether that's in a classroom medium. So that's what we will be looking for, that they are accredited to GWO. If they're accredited to GWO, then our working assumption as a developer operator is the training that they provide will be to the minimum standard that we expect. So I think that for me is the quality mark, is ensuring that we get that audit process appropriate for a digital environment, and that audit process can be delivered potentially digitally as well. So I think it won't just be the training objectives itself, but if we're going to be sustainable in this respect, it will also be affect how do we deliver the audit of that, and that will have to evolve and innovate as well.
Yeah. Philip, any final thoughts on this before we sort of open it up to broader questions?
No, I think I will only repeat what Jill is saying, so I will make it very short. Our clear expectation is, of course, that when we do this, we do it with the same certainty we have done in GWO for the physical training so far. We set up a very strict audit and certification scheme, and by that, we will also fully trust that anybody being certified according to that, we will also use these providers around the world, because this is our quality mark. This is our agreement across GWO, that if you have a GWO approved supplier, then we are going to use these as well. So this is actually our trust into the system. There's no doubt about it. Of course, the audit and verification needs to be a little bit different, maybe, but it will also give other opportunities for the feedback loop for the participants and stuff like that. So we actually can have a different continuous also evaluation of suppliers as well. But we strongly believe in the audit and certification setup we have today, and that we can continue this into a digitalization as well.
Yeah. Jakob, any questions that you have from your notes?
No, from my notes, I just made some notes about the accreditation and the auditing process, because we haven't touched a lot about that. It's one of those areas that's also changing these days with digitalization really picking up speed because of COVID, because we cannot travel, because we cannot have physical presence. We've allowed this year that as a test for this year that all audits except for the first one can be done as a remote audit. So annual surveillance and recertification can be done as a remotely based audit. And I think the lessons learned here are more or less the same as for training. It will in the end up as a blended solution to auditing, that we do the first audit with an auditor that comes up for a visual and physical inspection of what's going on at the training center, at the training partner. And then going further, he will be more and more remote, using the various tools that we have at our disposal. And that again, it opens up for more frequent visits than annual. It opens up for a more ongoing inspection from auditors. So there are lots of questions that are opening up when we think about what we can actually do. And maybe as a side note, we're working a lot these days with our auditing team, the auditors that we have approved to act on our behalf, delivering now auditor qualification training also as a virtual classroom, starting
2 next week.
Yeah, 2 weeks from now. So we'll do 10 of those virtual trainings this quarter.
Yeah. So
jump in for Phil. Yeah, you still have a couple of minutes?
Yes, we have plenty of time. Please do tell us. Thank you.
Yes, on this topic, I would also like to step one step further. So now we're talking about audit and compliance, so it's auditing. So is that enough? So that's one issue I always have concerns on. It's like how to guarantee the quality. Okay, so maybe some other schemes we should also consider. Well, that's GWO's work, like peer review, not only CB, but also peer review about the training providers, maybe some random witness, maybe some annual reports, maybe, some statistics of actions of the delegates that already got certificates from TPs as like indirect reflection of the quality. So yeah. For me, on behalf of the China committee, so I hear a voice from the customers. So we are very welcome, and those new schemes that could help to guarantee the quality of the training, especially when digitalization comes.
Yeah. I mean, is that something that's being partially catered for by the new profiling updates in Winder and the feedback from delegates on their training experience?
Yeah, maybe very briefly can touch upon that. So what we do with our quality oversight of all of the training going on. So the first step is that you receive a third-party audit, and the third party must be accredited to certain ISO standards, but they must also be approved by us. And one of the approval things that they go through is a training. So they have to attend the auditor qualification training. So we rely quite a lot on the third-party audit. And that's, of course, something, it's an inspection, year 0, and then every year. And what goes on in between, there's really no one inspecting them right now. So what you suggest, we have random visits along the line. We need to know who to visit randomly. So because if we just are going to visit randomly 378 training centers, that's quite a lot of traveling. So instead, we need to figure out a clever way of identifying those who may be delivering sub-quality. And one of the ways is to create surveys with all of the delegates. Whoever has attended that training will receive a course evaluation. And with those course evaluations that we get in from participants, we will be able to pinpoint areas where we do have problems. So in the first instance, we'll then call an auditor. The auditor will be extra mindful at the next surveillance visit about some certain things. So there are some checks we have, and we may at some point also, and sometimes this is in the extreme, we will send out an auditor, and we have done this historically with the Audit Compliance Committee, members of representatives of our membership will volunteer subject matter experts, someone who has an audit background, to travel with me or with someone from the team to visit a training center and do a double check. So actually a check on the auditor's work as well as a check of the training provider's work. But there's much more we can do in this respect. And who, you and I, we work a lot on this, and you have plenty of ideas, because this is also part of your professional background. And I'm happy that we have that relationship, so we can continue to grow and be better.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. So we're approaching the end of the panel discussion. So I want to thank everyone for joining us today, and especially to you, Jill, Lise, John, Barry, Yu Hui, and Philip Rasmussen for your insights. We're not quite finished though. We'd like a final feedback from you. Again, it's a trip to our online buddies at menti.com, and the code this time is 1596261. For this last question, we'd like you to put a pin in the metaphorical map and tell us where in the world you think the virtual classroom, gaming, gamification, e-learning solution, or total immersion training school will take off. Will it be China? Could it be the Americans who make use of it first? I believe, well, the Brazilians do everything on Instagram, so maybe we'll have an Instagram training class on Instagram Live one day. So please do tell us what you think. Obviously, there's some inherent bias from people representing their own countries, but that's nice to see India came in first. So, and this obviously links back to that some of those comments about countries with younger populations more used to using applications like this potentially, or it could just be linked directly to the market itself, and the need to invest in GWO training and so on. So
I'm curious, why did you not have Europe on par with the other regions here?
Because this is about developing outside Europe.
Yeah.
I wanted to include South Africa on here because it is a relevant, important, emerging market. We didn't really have that much space on the screen, and so I did my best to be as inclusive as possible. No. So we're getting some general direction towards North America. Taiwan is punching above its weight, obviously, a big new offshore market and lots of GWO training happening there already in the last couple of years.
So I think interestingly, one of the very first training centers to be to adopt the BSTR partial, the only digital standard that we have, were from one of the Baltic countries, and the Polish training center, starting to deliver training for this 6 months extension period outside of their own country and even North America and other places. When you go digital, you can deliver training everywhere, and I would tend to agree with this assumption that North American course participants, because of the growing demand that we see and the limited number of training centers, or rather the limited granularity, you have to travel far still to get to a GWO training center in North America. That may be one of the areas where we see really fast uptake. Same actually, demography and geography in India has the same kind of qualities. And the Taiwanese are so fast at adopting anything digital. So yeah, I believe it. I believe it.
Well, I mean, it's an imperfect way of looking into the future. This is a bit of a crystal ball, but thank you very much to those of you who gave us an answer on that. We'll leave it open on the screen until the very end, but we are approaching the end of today's festivities. So that kind of wraps it up for this part of the expert series. But don't be a stranger. We have a special North America focused edition next Monday at 5 p.m. Central European time, which is 11 a.m. Eastern, 8 a.m. Pacific. We've got a great panel from Erstal, Vestas, and Siemens Gamesa, plus one of the market's leading GWO training providers, High Plains Technology Center. Again, the subject is digitalization, and remember that all that we learn from this series is being fed back to the whole GWO membership at Astra session on the 29th of September. So it's been really valuable to have all of this time in the last 3 weeks, and thank you again to Philip, Jill, John, and Yuhui, and to you, Jakob.
Yeah, thank you, Ralph. The mastermind behind this.
It's smooth, huh? So on that note, we will call it a day, and looks like North America's winning. So we'll put some pressure on them next week to see if that's actually true.
Yeah, that's appropriate. Thank you. Yeah, good.
All right.
By the way, the first vote for China is me. So.
Yeah. Unfortunately, we will also be planning a Chinese specific edition of this webinar, which is one where probably the results of this little survey will look a bit different, I imagine. So,
I imagine so.
Yeah.
I hope so.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
See you soon.
Bye.
Bye-bye.